on Sunday morning, what some might call the Saturday night special. I did not handle conflict very well. I was not mature. Yeah, if I had that time machine where I'd go back when I showed the kids, I would do things differently, which means do it better. That's my dream. And sometimes our kids have a way of kind of poking holes in our dreams. I remember one time I was having a conversation with Cora, and she asked me if I could do anything differently, would I? And I told her about this dream. I said, yeah, I'd go back when I was 13, 1986, and I would do all these changes. And she stopped me dead in the tracks, and she said, Dad, if you did that, I would never be born. Wow. That comment reminded me of a movie I saw once called Mr. Destiny. Starred Jim Belushi. And in the story, what happens is he believes that if he would have just hit that baseball, then his life would be different. It would have been so much better. And so an angel comes to him and actually shows what his life would be like if he would have hit that home run. And sure enough, he marries into wealth, but not the love of his life. He works in the corporate world. He's working for his father-in-law. And all of his friends from his real life are now his employees. And guess what? They don't want to hang out with him. And probably one of my most favorite scenes in the movie is the angel comes and shows him that if he would have hit that baseball and hit that home run, his life went in this direction. But instead, he missed it and his life went in this direction. I think of that scenario in light of why we're here today. If you're just joining us, we're just about ready to wrap up our sermon series called Route 66. It is based on the blog entries of Thomas Hall, who I met one summer as he was traveling his bike from Montana down to Texas. Why? Why does he do this? Why does he take this journey? Well, today we're going to actually hear two of his blog entries. And the first one, he talks about why. I've got about 630 miles left to go in the next 14 days before landing my mechanical horse in Del Rio. Already talked to Tim at the local bike store, made arrangements to ship my recumbent back to the Northwest, and then board a bus to San Antonio to catch a flight to Spokane. Hard to imagine that this tour is coming to an end. Can't say how much good I've been able to accomplish for Hope Village yet, but when the dust settles and everyone has made their contribution, I pray that enough donations will come in to completely build another house for the children of South Africa. They are why I ride. He is why I ride. If church was meant to be a verb, not a noun, then I hope that I've honored that shift in thinking through this ride. May we all change the world every day through one kind act, one prayer, one word that makes a difference in someone's life. The journey is what is important for Thomas. Staying focused when life looks difficult, arduous, even downright unfair, is still important. Keeping on task with God in our sights is why we ride. It is why we continue the journey along the Route 66 of life. There was a revival one time happened in a church, and what was customary is the evangelist was sitting up front with the pastor, and things were raucous. The music was just wonderful. People were giving their lives to Christ. And just before the evangelist was about ready to speak, his little girl comes up and hands him a note, and she just says, "It's from Mom." And so the pastor looks over at the note, kind of scans it, and it just says, "KISS, K-I-S-S." And the pastor looks at the evangelist and says, "That is so sweet. It is wonderful that you have such a supportive spouse in your ministry and in your work with God." And the evangelist, he kind of looks at the pastor and says, I think you might have misunderstood this note here. It's not what you think. It means, keep it short, stupid. I believe that single-minded focus is great advice. That's why no one has built me a time machine yet. I can't go back and change anything. This is the life that we have, and we can't turn back. All we can do is learn on the journey as we move forward and what is already in front of us. Let me share with you Thomas's other blog entry. Up at 4:45 a.m. and pedaling on Route 83 by 5:30. I knew this would be a tough day of travel. I had checked the weather and knew that I'd be facing 20 to 30 mile per hour winds all day. By 7:30 a.m., the wind had shifted and began coming up from the south. I was reduced to low gears all day, finally straggling into liberal at 4:30 p.m. Unlike motor-powered vehicles, human-powered vehicles rely on energy from pumping pedals, similar to a hamster that can amuse itself for hours on end or by repetitious running on its wheel. So hamsters and cyclists are acutely aware that the only pistons they have are legs. Hamsters only look simple, but are really quite perceptive. They must generate their own movement. As the south winds exerted 30-mile-an-hour strength, the clash of pedal and wind turned into an 11-hour marathon. What to do when you're facing in-your-face winds all day? Well, here's what you might do. Pray for everyone you can think of. That took my mind off the force that was sucking my energy with every mile. Sing. I discovered a great song with interesting theological content. Learned it in Kentucky, sort of a Kentucky rap. Chorus, well, I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. Gotta make it to heaven somehow. Though the devil tempts me and tries to turn me around, he's offered everything that's got a name, all the wealth I'd want and worldly fame. If I coulda, stilla, wouldn't take a nothing for my journey now. Take lots of snack breaks. In 30-mile-an-hour winds, every mile is cause for hilarious and lingering celebration. Focus on short-term goals, like some whacked-out snake or other roadkill up ahead, or a tire fragment, or a Bud Light can, or a grain elevator in the distance. Initiate friendly competition. I've lured meadowlarks and red wings into lengthy competition, and so passed the time. I mimicked their call, and sure enough, they'd have the last word on the subject. Be grateful. We all have the choice in each situation to be humbly grateful or grumbly hateful. This is a truth. We choose our disposition. Resistance is not our problem. How we'll choose to respond is our greatest challenge. Make a good decision to be grateful. As I review the bullets, I'm thinking that most of these could be applicable in the office, at home, sitting around a table in a committee meeting, or wherever you feel a lot of hot air. If I coulda, still I wouldn't take a nothing for my journey now. You know what really amazes me about his blog entries is that Thomas never says, I could stop at any time. He doesn't say, if I could do it all over, I would have chosen a more downhill route, something a little bit easier. And he doesn't say, forget about those kids. I'm tired. No, he pushes on, taking it one step, one turn of the wheel, one bid to move forward. And in the process, he realizes something. He's learning something about the journey. It's the little things that matter. What we learn along the way that makes us stronger. That each moment, whether good or bad, is a moment in grace. And grace is key. Because God knows that bad things happen to you. God knows that the journey is rough. God knows about your struggle and pain. And God knows that along the Route 66 of life, it's worth it. Because how we respond to life's muck is vital to us moving forward. Do you remember Walter Cronkite? My dad loved watching him on the CBS Evening News. Come home every night, would watch him. Well, when he got ready to retire, as you might imagine, there was a stiff competition to see who would sit in his chair. Every newsman deemed this to be worthy. And one man was Bob Schaefer. Well, he wrote a book called This Just In, and he tells about that retirement experience that put everything into perspective. He said that he was passing a restaurant when a drunk guy stumbles out of it, almost runs into him, and Bob Schaefer realizes he knows the guy. He was once a well-respected journalist, and he takes him to coffee to kind of sober him up, and as they're visiting, he finds out that this journalist had actually been up for the same position that Walter Cronkite received. And when Walter Cronkite received the anchorman's chair, this guy got bitter, turned to the bottle, and his marriage fell apart. That day, Bob Schaefer resolved to keep clear-headed about his job and not let it be a measure of his self-worth. And when Dan Rather was chosen as Cronkite's replacement, Schaefer says that he was able to accept that news with grace and move on to another part of his career. few years back, I made the decision to leave my banking career and re-enter the professional ministry. Now, before I could accept the appointment to be your pastor, I had to meet with the bishop. At that point, it was a different bishop. It was Bishop Jones. He took me to breakfast at Perkins. I made sure that he paid for it. Good breakfast. And he asked me why I left the ministry initially. And I said to him, I said, what have you heard? He says, well, quite a bit, but I want to hear from you. And so I shared with him all the painful things that happened to me and my family on behalf of the conference. And he listened. He did not sugarcoat anything. He didn't sit there and say, oh, Seth, I'm so sorry that happened to you. No, we asked some tough questions. And he asked me if I could do it over, would I change anything? You see, everything for me and my family started when I said yes to be part of a conference program. And by saying yes, the ball was in motion for me to leave the ministry and to go into the field of banking. And so I looked at the bishop and I said, I would have said no to the question. But then I kind of laughed a little bit and I said, no, actually I've learned quite a bit. I got the business degree that I always wanted. I always wanted to be a banker. And so I went into that field. I learned about vines and vineyards and wine, something I would have never had the opportunity to do before. I get to be home with my kids every night and the weekends, and no one would say, Seth, you're part of the itinerant system, we're going to move you here. And I got to sit where you sat. Many times in those years, nobody knew that I was a pastor. And people will share a lot with you if they don't think that you're a pastor about the church and pastors. And I got to be ministered to for 3 years by Lord. I learned that I hated being slave to the time clock. And as I said last week, sometimes it is good to see your coworkers only once or twice a year and not every day. And I learned why everyone hates Mondays. That has got to be the most miserable, depressing day of the work week. I told the bishop, I learned a lot about myself. About the church, about the opportunity to sit where you are. It's a time of self-discovery. It was painful. But when you hit the baseball, or you miss it, when you say yes to a decision or no, it affects everything. And that's why I think it is attractive. And believe me, it is so attractive to think of alternative history, because there is pain in real life. Growth and maturity happens when you're facing a tough hill. When you're forced to hear no. When plans don't work out. Growth and maturity happens when we don't look back and realize it's all about the journey ahead of us. I'm going to pause now and turn it over to Jerry Lynn as she shares with you a passage of Scripture.
I'll be reading Acts 17, verse 32 through chapter 18, verse 11. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." At that point, Paul left them, but some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with him. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila and a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together. By trade, they were tent makers. Every Sabbath, he would argue in the synagogue and would try to convince Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with proclaiming the word, testifying to the Jews that the Messiah was Jesus. When they opposed and reviled him in protest, he shook the dust from his clothes and said to them, "Your blood will be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then he left the synagogue and went to the house of a man named Titus Judas. At worship of God, his house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the official of the synagogue, together with all of his household, and many of the Corinthians who heard Paul became believers and were baptized. One night the Lord said to Paul in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but speak and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will lay a hand on you to harm you. For there are many in this city who are my people." He stayed there a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them.
Now, last week we learned a little bit about the early church, and we realized that Paul had a setback here. And in fact, it was a huge setback in the city of Athens. Now, commentators will tell you that it was a great speech. Preachers will say it was a wonderful sermon, but we know better because we've been following the journey of the early church. And we've noticed something about the early Christians. They go through violence and jail time, beatings and martyrdom. That just becomes the norm. But the problem was in Athens, it was a pleasant experience, a nice little debate, if you will. Nothing bad happens, and because of that, it's a failure. Church gets started. There's no evidence that Paul ever wrote to anyone in Athens. And here we have just one piece of evidence that a couple people listened. But it was a setback that doesn't stop Paul. Remember, verse 1 says, "After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And he stays there a year and a half. He lives right next door to the synagogue. He converts Crispus, an official of the synagogue. You see, that's why pastors try to keep their lay leaders happy, because they don't want them going next door. You see, something great happens after the colossal failure of Athens. Paul doesn't give up. He stays focused on his mission, and he allows the Holy Spirit to keep pushing him to start the Christian community of Corinth. You've read 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, a direct result. Our failures, as painful as they are not moments of giving up, but ways of staying focused and remembering why we ride, why we must move forward. Monty Robbins wrote a book called The Man Who Listens to Horses. He says that people who never learn from their failure are doomed to be dream stealers because they share it with everyone else. Don't listen to them, he says. When Monty was in high school, his teacher gave the class an assignment. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you get out of school? And Monty wrote that he wanted to own his own 200-acre ranch and raise thoroughbred racehorses. His teacher gave him an F. And said the grade was there because it was a dream, unrealistic. And looked at Monty and says that any student that lives in the back of a camper on the back of a pickup would not be able to amass enough money to buy a ranch, purchase breeding stock, and pay the necessary salaries for ranch hands. Monty said that he looked at that teacher. Now, I do not recommend this for any of our students. But he looked at that teacher and he says, because the teacher asked Monty if he wanted to rewrite it for a better grade. And Monty looked at that teacher and he said, "You keep your F. I'm keeping my dream." Today, Monty's flag is up. It's a 154-acre ranch in Solvang, California, raises thoroughbred racehorses, and trains hundreds of horse trainers in a more humane way to join up with and train horses. Don't give up. Don't give in. You may have missed your chance at hitting that home run that would have just changed your life forever. But this is the life that's been dealt with you now. The journey, and I still believe the dream is out there, is still before us. Amen. I'm going to ask the ushers to wait upon us as we give back to God.